Good afternoon. Glad that you're here and that we are going to have 1 hour together. I don't need to do a long introduction about anxiety to activism. The anxiety is clear, all that's happening in the United States and around the world, from health to politics to environment. And action is why we are here, to translate any anxiety we're having, any frustrations, fears, to translate those effectively into serious activism. To do that, we have three extraordinary panelists, but we're going to begin actually to focus ourselves very directly on mindfulness. To do that, we're asking Melissa Carter, who's the Interim Senior Director for Global Spiritual Life at New York University, and is the head of mindfulness education and programming for Mindful NYU. In 2019, Melissa launched Mindful NYU internationally, expanding its reach to become the largest campus-wide global mindfulness initiative. Thank you so much, Melissa, and delighted to have you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for being here and for your time and presence. We're entering the final weeks of the election season, and for some, this is a time that's challenging. It's a time that feels turbulent. It's a time that's nerve-wracking. It's a time that, in addition to the already challenging season that we are in, could cause some tension and some deep and difficult emotions to be with. So I wanted to offer some tools to help you regulate in those moments of tension, in those moments of when your nervous system is starting to ignite and get activated. Our brains are doing a lot of work right now, and our amygdala, our primal stem of our brain, which controls our fight, flight, or freeze system, is constantly being activated right now. So we want to be mindful with how we consume information and mindful with how we consume and give out our energy and others' energies to help try and keep ourselves centered and balanced as we move through a challenging time. So that amygdala that's activated also ignites two other parts of the brain: the emotional brain, the limbic brain, and the thinking brain, the front of the neocortex. Now, the frontal neocortex, the thinking brain, has much more neural circuitry than the emotional brain, the limbic brain, where our emotions and our memories are stored. And then in our rational brain, where we can be logical and centered and with the present moment, it takes more time for that to turn on. So using these tools of self-regulation can help us create that pause for both parts of that brain to catch up. So when our first reaction is a visceral emotional response, these tools help regulate us to center so the thinking, logical, rational, and availability to be with the present moment can turn on. Does that make sense? Right. So let me know if you have questions, but I also wanted to share that these tools that I'm going to give us right now, I want to invite you to practice with me and to notice your energy right now. Just notice your energy and your tension that you might be having in your body, and then how you're feeling after we do the tools. So as I said, mindfulness, the reason why we want to pay a mindful approach to challenging situations is that we're able to be with what is without letting it absorb us, without letting it take over us. That way we can say, I'm with some tension right now. I'm with some sadness. I'm with some anger. I'm with some joy. I'm with some happiness. But we allow our emotions, thoughts, and feelings to be at the table with us without them overtaking us. So I invite you, if it's available, to come to a seated posture. And we're going to keep our eyes open for now. And we're going to do something called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And this is actually really helpful for not just moments of tension, but for Zoom fatigue, which we're all on. So if you're starting to feel like you can't focus, you can't pay attention, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, which engages all the senses, is great to give the one that's burnt out a bit of a rest and activate other wires and neurons in the brain. So I'm going to move us from 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 to a breathing technique. So I'm going to invite you to come to a seated posture, relaxing the shoulders in your back pockets, relaxing your jaw, And I'm going to invite you to, using your sense of sight, look around the room off the screen and bring your attention to 5 different items, taking a breath with each item before you move on to the next. Really bringing your attention to each item, taking a breath, and then moving on. Doing that 5 times. And then I'm going to invite you to your sense of touch. And touch 4 things on your person or something around you, taking a breath with each item and really feeling it, really being with that texture, all of your attention on it before you move to the next item. And then I'm going to invite you to move to your sense of sound and listening so intently to sound that you can distinguish 3 sounds, one from each other, taking a breath with each one before you move on to the next. And then we'll move to our sense of smell. Smelling 2 different things on your person or around you. And bringing all your attention to that smell and really focusing on that before moving on to the next one. And then finally, your sense of taste. And if you don't have anything to taste, you can use your own saliva, but really taking one taste of something and really bringing all of your attention to that taste as you, again, breathe deeply. And then after that, I'm going to invite you to close your eyes or keep a soft gaze looking at something in front of you. And just for a few rounds, taking a deep inhale in for a count of 4 and letting it out for either 4 or 6. Both scientifically proven to regulate the nervous system, but finding which ratio works for you. So taking a deep breath in for 4, out for 6, in for 4, out for 4. Playing around with each and seeing which one helps bring a sense of centered, ground, and calm to you. And we'll just do that for a couple breaths together. And slowly bringing some movement to the body, even turning side to side. Also alerting the vagus nerve, which will calm the system as well. Taking a deep breath and coming back to the screen. Now we went very fast and I'm sorry for that, but there's a lot to cover today. So I hope that you'll take a few notes of those tools that we've given today to use in moments where you might need some centering or grounding. And also if you want to practice a bit more, on November 2nd, I, Andy Hamilton, and the Office of Communication are going to be offering a gathering to talk about complexity and resilience and the tools to help us through this challenging time. So I'm going to put that link to register in the chat box. We'll be practicing these tools. I hope you'll use them. Thank you for being here. Thank you for using your voice. And I hope you heard something today that was helpful. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Melissa. That was wonderful. Really, really appreciate it. I'm there. And now I'd like to introduce Ría Thompson-Washington. She's the National Democracy Manager, Voting Rights and Voting Rights and Democracy Program. As she explains, as we approach a monumental election with so much at stake for Black, Brown, and Indigenous people, working people and unemployed workers and other marginalized groups all over the country, our collective power is needed to transform our democracy, to advance justice and equity, and to create a world in which we all can thrive. Ría is in Atlanta, in the middle of working, took a break to be able to come and speak with us. Thank you so much and welcome.
No worries. Thank you for having me. As stated, my name is Ría Thompson-Washington. I use she, her pronouns. In addition to being the National Democracy Manager at CPD, I'm also a member of the Mass Defense Steering Committee for the National Lawyers Guild. And so I do a lot of protest support, teaching lawyers how to be radical, and use the lawyering skills to help protect dissent and defend people in the streets. So with that basis, I came to this work because my mother was a naturalized citizen who the weight of voting and participating in this country's like election participation was super important for her. So as the eldest daughter of an immigrant and a sharecropper from South Carolina, I learned from my family how important it is to do this work. And so I most recently, I started in undergrad trying to help folks register to vote, doing election forms on campus. And then I went through a lot of organizing different positions and different jobs. And I finally landed at, after working at the Lawyers Committee for Civil Rights for the last 2 years in their Voting Rights Project, I joined CPD to help frame what we're going to do for this current cycle, how we're going to address all of the issues that we see in voting. Right now, we know the landscape is awful, but I'm going to lay it out for you so that there's no pretense of what we're all dealing with. In addition to being in the middle of a global pandemic that has caused an eviction crisis, that has families and individuals struggling without resources because due to loss of jobs or cutback in pay. We also have the administration trying to undermine the election and its results, and trying in every way to make sure that everyone doesn't have the free and fair opportunity to have their ballot cast and counted. We're in the middle of like multiple climate crises. In some states, there are still fires burning. In other states, there are hurricanes that are destroying homes and thusly putting into flux where people are going to be registering to vote, where they'll be living, if they'll be living in the same place. And then also just the normal woes of voter suppression that we've become accustomed to, the long lines, the closed polling locations that are closed later, dealing with, in addition to all of those things, there is also just widespread voter misinformation, changing processes, state laws that are still being and rules that are still being decided down to the minute. So we're in a moment when there's a lot of anxiety around the election. There's I neglected to mention that in the midst of an uprising around the country, multiple cities and states are still invested heavily in uprising. And as a result of those uprisings in response to police brutality, there are also all of these situations make for our current election cycle. So what do? That's a lot to be worried about. That's a lot to be concerned about. And how are we going to address those situations? Well, what we're going to do is, instead of allowing these things to happen to us and recognize, as you've seen, there has been record turnout for early voting because people are intent on making sure that their ballot is cast. Here in Georgia, we've been experiencing people waiting in long lines, but also people going through waiting for those long lines so that they can ensure that their ballot is cast. Similarly, we've experienced a few issues of a couple of different skirmishes that involve police and folks who are trying to be violent at the polls. For example, having a voter pull a gun on a white woman, pull a gun on Black voters at a polling location in Albany, Georgia earlier this week. and having police officers profile myself and other folks as we're at the polls last Friday in Macon in advance of a Trump rally. And those kinds of things are not just happening here in Georgia. Georgia is super important because of the fact that it has 2 Senate seats that will likely be going into runoff that could change the Senate in January. But this is indicative of what is happening all across the South, where suppression is running rampant, and also in Black and brown minority communities where even in northern states or in the Midwest or out West, where we tend to think that folks are more progressive and liberal, there's still widespread voter suppression and voter intimidation in Black and brown communities. And when you add to all of that, the administration and the current occupant of the White House actively calling for Proud Boys to come out, for white supremacists to come out and do poll watching, like this is the landscape. And so here's what we're doing in response. First, we're training as many poll monitors as possible. Poll monitors are folks who are nonpartisan. They help warm the line. They pass out water, they pass out snacks, they answer basic questions. Is there anything I can help you with that you're worried about? Or are you concerned about anything on the ballot? Is there anything that I can do to assist? And they just basically make sure that folks who are standing in line have some, again, snacks and fruit, water, things that they can snack on if the line is particularly lined. And also, there's also information about the voting process that can be passed out. We also are working, in addition to creating a large network of poll monitors, we've also created a de-escalation model that takes a poll monitor and mixes it with a legal observer that we often see at protests who observe the actions of the state at protests. And we've created from that a guardian program that empowers everyday folks to be able to stand in that space between violence that may occur at the polls and making sure that the voter can vote. So we're teaching folks around the country to be able to de-escalate harm, to isolate and contain it where possible, and to make sure that the voting experience is protected above all. Because at the end of the day, everyone who goes to the poll has the right and the opportunity to cast their ballot, should be to be freely and fairly and free from intimidation. And so we want to make sure that we uphold that and protect that. And to that end, again, we've been doing trainings around the country. I'm doing a training next week specifically for legal professionals who are otherwise trained in legal observers or other types of mediation skills and want to use that as transferable skills to share with their community. And then we're deploying folks around the country. So CPD has 7 states that we're focusing most of our programming on. That's Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Florida, Georgia, and Arizona. And then in other states that we know are also going to need some care or have asked for assistance, we're making sure that the voter guardians that we train are able to deploy. So folks who are in New Jersey and New York, we're asking them to help us with the program that we're doing in Pennsylvania. And folks, we're also running a program in Ohio with affiliates, and California, and Texas and North Carolina. So we're really trying to make sure that all of the battleground and swing states are covered for access, to make sure that those spaces, we count every vote, and we're going to chase every ballot and make sure that they're cured or have the opportunity to be cured. And what that means is sometimes the election judge or the election officials will reject ballots because they're not properly completed, or they might be missing some information or what have you. And so making sure that those instances where folks have voted and need to be cured can be cured in the time frame immediately after the election, so that we can make sure that every single vote counts. It's really important this year. This is the year that we have talked about for years. This year, between the Senate races and the House races, we actually have an opportunity to make real change. And not to say that voting is the only way to accomplish that, but it is part of the process because it is one of the tools that we have to dismantle the master's house. And so with that, I will take a break and turn it back over to David. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really, I really appreciate it. Ría, it's wonderful meeting you this way. And I look forward to your hearing more, learning more, and locating for our students, whether it's through the Center for Popular Democracy or many of the other places, finding ways that they can participate. Our thinking, of course, these are what all the things that can be done before the election and on election day itself to be able to protect the right of people to vote. That said, we also are thinking it may be necessary, it may be part of defending democracy to engage in other ways, even after the election is over, to ensure that the votes are respected, that votes are counted, and the democracy prevails. And towards that end, we're thrilled to have Johanna Miller from the New York Civil Liberties Union here. Johanna is a nationally recognized public policy expert on civil liberties issues, including the school to prison pipeline, student privacy rights, and police reform. She's contributed to groundbreaking civil rights legislation in New York City, including the Community Safety Act, which set up oversight of racially discriminatory policing by the New York Police Department, and the Student Safety Act, which disclosed how Black and Latino children are pushed out of New York City schools by discriminatory discipline policies. In 2018, she co-produced the Museum of Broken Windows. We are really delighted to have you once again. Johanna joined us years ago to help motivate people to activism, and it's great to have you back again. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. It's a uniquely embarrassing experience to hear someone read your bio, but I really appreciate you guys for inviting me. I have 11 slides and I have 20 minutes, so I'm gonna just jump right into it. And I'm gonna give you some information about your right to demonstrate and some like tips and tricks for how to be successful if you're participating in public protest. We'll start with just some basic information. So it is your right to demonstrate in public spaces. And this is, everything I say in this presentation is going to be true everywhere you go in the country. I practice in New York City, and so I might have some specific information about New York City that I share throughout, but all of this would be applicable to anywhere in the United States. So you do have the right to demonstrate in public spaces. And what I mean by that is the sidewalk, a public park, out in basically anywhere in New York City that isn't inside the subway, which even there are some rules inside the subway that would allow you to demonstrate there. You can pretty much just walk outside your door and protest. You could grab some friends and go out. You have the right to march or stand or picket on any sidewalk. The only limitation to that is that you can't block the entire sidewalk. So as long as there's room for people to walk by without forcing them to go into the street, you're good. You don't need any kind of permit or permission for that. And that's good news because our permitting system, which does exist for larger like parades and bigger gatherings, is pretty much broken since COVID. There's pretty much no permits going out. But a parade permit would be something like if you wanted to shut down Fifth Avenue and do the Pride Parade and you need to shut it to traffic, those would require a permitting process with the city. But in general, nearly every demonstration that you would participate in is not going to be a permitted demonstration. What spaces are public this is sort of less vital in New York City because so much of our space is public, but particularly if you are in the suburbs, there might be certain spaces that feel very public but aren't actually public. So things like parking lots, of like a supermarket, for example, is probably not a public space, and there might be additional rules there. So that's just something to keep in mind. But basically, get out there, walk around, stand outside City Hall. That is your right. Two things I'm just going to say here on this first slide that are things that most people don't know. If you're going to a demonstration, make sure that if you're carrying a sign, it either does not have like a stick or a pole attached to it, so you're holding it with your hands, or whatever it is attached to is like a soft, like a cardboard tube. For example, shipping tubes are a really good way to do this. And I just say that because here in New York City and really everywhere that I know of, police are actually going to stop you if you have a sign that's on a rigid support. So if you have a sign that's being held up on like a 2x4 or even like a yardstick, they're probably going to stop you and ask you to remove it because they will believe that that could be used as a weapon. We're going to get more into like their definitions of weapons in a little bit, but that's just a very basic thing to know. If you're carrying a sign, it's best just to carry it. And then the second thing, this is a specific New York City rule that almost nobody knows about, but it actually is illegal to write on sidewalks in New York City with chalk. That is against the law. We have a city ordinance, and as you might imagine, it is enforced almost entirely on the basis of how the officer feels at the moment. It's incredibly discriminatory. It's enforced against, just a couple weeks ago, there was a 50-something-year-old Black woman who was chalking on the Upper West Side, and she was like arrested for that, but lots of other people, artists or kids or anybody, even businesses, would sometimes chalk and nothing happens to them. So we know that this is enforced in a totally arbitrary way. So it's best to know before you go out that if you're planning on writing slogans or anything out with chalk, you actually can be stopped for that by the police. Okay, so this is just a list of like things that you want to leave at home when you're protesting. So drugs, it might be obvious, but maybe it's not. In New York City, marijuana is decriminalized, and in many other places around the country, it's actually legalized. But I would say in a protest situation, it's really best to leave that at home because your chance of having a police encounter is at least marginally higher in a protest than it is in your day-to-day life. So let's just leave home anything that could potentially escalate that situation or make things more complicated. The second one, again, maybe obvious, weapons, leave your weapons at home. I put "and weapons" in quotes here. And the reason is because when you're thinking about what you're carrying into a protest, you really want to put yourself into the mind of a police officer. They are going to be very creative when they decide what they want to charge you with. If they want to come after you, like they have a million tools in their toolbox to come after you. And what they decide is a weapon could be something you never thought was a weapon. So for example, I have had a client who was arrested for carrying a keychain that his school gave him as an award for like perfect attendance, a teenager, and the police decided that that was a weapon. Over the summer, there was a lot of coverage of the police saying that a tire repair kit was a weapon. They can basically find anything on you and decide it's a weapon. So the next category is tools. That's obviously still connected here to the same sort of categorically connected. If you carry tools for work or for whatever, just maybe leave them home. And then spray paint is another one. They're going to interpret your carrying of spray paint however they want, and it may make your life more difficult. So best to just leave that at home. These next categories, these next four things, I put them in a different color because these are really like a use your discretion thing. Valuables, if you get arrested at a protest, if you did get arrested, the police will take everything from you. They're going to take jewelry, they're going to take money, they're going to take your phone, anything you have. If one of those things is something that you cannot live without, it's best not to bring it with you because the truth of the matter is you don't always get those things back. They may be taken by the police when you are taken in and you never see them again. So if it's your grandmother's locket or, you know, your watch that you've had your whole life, maybe just leave those things at home because there's not a 0% chance that you will never see them again if you were to get arrested. Large backpacks and purses, the police are going to be more apt to search larger bags. So the smaller, the better. You're also less likely to forget that there's something in there. Condoms, this one is a little bit unique to New York, but in New York, prosecutors are permitted to use evidence that a person was carrying more than 3 condoms as evidence of prostitution or soliciting charges. It's a very quirky and extremely problematic area of New York law that we've been trying to change for a long time. But it does happen. People do get charged. If you got picked up at a protest, maybe it has anything to do with condoms or soliciting prostitution. But if you had condoms in your backpack or in your pocket, they could potentially turn that over as evidence to a DA. So best to leave them at home if you can. And then bikes is another one. You might need to ride your bike to a protest. We're not going to tell anyone not to do that. But we do see bikes getting impounded quite a lot, particularly over this past summer in New York City. The police were aggressively taking bikes from people. So you may want to park your bike farther away than you normally would, and just keep it out of the area in order to protect your bike from getting impounded. Okay, so we're going to talk about privacy protections. So let me give you just a tiny bit of background. Primarily, I'm going to be talking about electronic privacy on this slide. And what you need to know is that the police are using all kinds of techniques. This is very well documented, particularly with the NYPD, but it's really happening all over the country to see what's on your cell phone. And some of those techniques include using a device called a stingray, which you may have heard of. A stingray is literally a piece of equipment that goes inside the trunk of a police car and mimics the signal of a cell phone tower. So your phone thinks that it is communicating with the nearest AT&T tower, but it's actually communicating with this fake tower in an NYPD cruiser and transmitting all of that information to them. So a stingray doesn't give them access to the content of your messages, but it does tell them who you're sending messages to and when and where you are when you send them. So that's not to scare you or flip you out, but more just to let you know that most people don't have a really good sense of how far the police are going to spy on people right now. And I think it's easy to like brush it off and be like, well, that would never happen to me, but it actually is happening all the time. So I'm going to give you some tips for how to protect your privacy. And what I mean by that is primarily your cell phone privacy. So the first thing is to keep up to date, update your iOS, update your operating system, update all of your apps. If you just keep putting that off and you're like later, those often contain security patches that are really important, and that if you don't update, they can be exploited by the police to get information that you don't want them to have. The second tip is to lock your phone with a code, and we recommend a 6 or 9-digit code. Don't use your fingerprint. So I have a little fingerprint icon here as a reminder, but don't use your fingerprint. Now, why is that? So if you are picked up by the police, you have the Fifth Amendment right to remain silent. You've probably all heard that phrase. I have the right to remain silent. The right to remain silent means you never have to tell anyone your code, but you don't have the right to not have your finger like smushed down on your phone. Or as we saw this summer, we actually saw a police officer pull a guy's mask off and then hold his phone up to his face to try to unlock it using his facial recognition lock. That video is on YouTube if you want to look it up. That happened in Queens. That you don't have a right for that to not happen to you. You don't have a right for them to not hold your phone up to your face or force your fingers down on the phone. So use a code, because you never, ever, ever have to give away your code. And if you hate using a code, just use it when you're at a protest and then go back to the facial recognition later if you want. The next thing is to use encrypted message platforms. I'm not going to talk a lot about this. You can Google this, but basically you want to use a platform when you're sending text messages, particularly if you're engaged in any kind of civil disobedience. You just want to make sure that those messages are encrypted. And so you want to use apps like Signal, or if you're texting an iPhone to another iPhone, that is end-to-end encrypted, WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted. So just look around online, make sure you're using encrypted message platform. Live streaming is something that there's been a lot of talk about as a way to defeat the challenge of like the cops taking your phone and then deleting everything off of it, or maybe you don't ever get your phone back. And so one way that people often try to get around that is by using Periscope or Facebook Live or Instagram Live to really show what they're seeing in real time, so it can't be deleted later. I'm going to come back to this because live streaming can also have some consequences that I think are important for you to know, but it is an option and something that you might want to think about. So the sort of other side of the coin of live streaming is that we really want to protect other people's privacy as well. Most likely when you go out into a protest situation, you're not trying to become a witness for the state. That's probably not your goal. You probably don't necessarily want to be a witness in a case, for example, if someone is arrested for civil disobedience or for vandalism or for assault on a police officer, and it so happens that you recorded that thing, the DA is going to come to you and ask you for that thing. They may even issue a subpoena for that record, for the photographs, for the video. And so one thing to keep in mind is to really just, let's not film what other protesters are doing unless it's part of showing what the state is doing. We're really, as protesters, we're exercising our right to be out there. What we're really trying to do, I imagine, and what you want to do when you get out there is really to keep an eye on how the state is responding, to participate in your First Amendment activity, but not necessarily to be creating reams of evidence for a later prosecution. So just keep that in mind when you're recording things, that they could, if they could potentially contain evidence that might be used against someone. And then the final thing, which is, this is sort of extra, but if you really don't want to risk that your phone might get taken from you or confiscated, or that any of your data would be surveilled or used improperly, then we recommend that people use a burner phone. You can get these for like $99. It's really, they're pretty common. You just go to Best Buy and get a burner, and basically you can put everything you need on there, whatever apps you need for the day. And that way you have nothing to worry about, or less to worry about, I'll say. Okay, so the next thing is about physical protection. This next couple slides are really important in the current moment that we're in, because I've been doing this work for almost 13 years, and I've never seen the level of police violence against protesters as I did this summer. I've been on the streets during many major New York City demonstrations, and just the level of violence was so much bigger this year than we've seen in the past. And so it's really important that we are going into these situations in a way that is safe. So here's some tips for that. Be aware of your surroundings. By that, I mean, like, if you're walking in a group of people, and it can be really easy to just follow that path and not realize where you are, what neighborhood you're in, how you're going to get home, or maybe you're going down a dead-end street or something where it might make it really easy for the police to actually do a mass arrest. Or you might be walking across a bridge and all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I'm on the Brooklyn Bridge. I didn't even know that's where we were going, and now there's no way off except to keep going. Don't get into a situation like that where it's surprising to you. Just make sure that you're aware of your surroundings, and that you have a plan for how you're going to get out of the space. So if you're in, and we're going to talk about the pins later, but if you're in one of those NYPD like barricaded areas, like, let's not lose track of where the exits are, for example, in case you do have an emergency or you need to get out, or frankly, you just are over it. Make sure that you are able to protect yourself and keep yourself safe. Pay attention to traffic. These are largely unpermitted demonstrations that we've seen over this summer, which means that the NYPD did not close the street to vehicle traffic. So you could be walking with a group of people and have no really sense of what's going on around you, and all of a sudden there's cars going by. In fact, we see the police open and shut streets in like a very deliberate way to break up demonstrations, and car traffic is a real threat. They're not necessarily going to keep the cars from coming into the crowd. And so you really need to pay more attention to traffic than you think. I would pay the amount of attention to traffic that you do when you're just walking down the street. Don't lose sight of that just because you're in a group of people, because it's a real danger, and sometimes it's even purposeful. And then the last one is to have IRL and virtual partners. So have somebody in real life who's at the protest, who knows you and knows what you're doing and knows how to get a hold of you and can look out for you, and have virtual partners. So have somebody who is not on the scene, who is kind of your emergency contact in case anything does happen, or in case you end up getting arrested, that you have someone to call. I see that there's a thing in the Q&A, but I feel like if I click on that, I'm going to lose my screen sharing. So I don't know if it's best to take that question now, David, or just keep going and come back to them at the end.
Johanna, you can keep going. We're going to answer questions towards the end.
Okay, great. Okay, so pre-draft an emergency message. This is exactly what it sounds like. Just write that text so that if you are getting arrested, you just have to push one button that says, "Hi, I'm getting arrested," and hopefully that goes to your virtual partner who knows where you are. And then water and first aid, just carry what you can carry, what makes sense for you. Make sure that you are well equipped in case of an emergency. So this, I mentioned we were going to talk about the barriers. So these are just some examples of, in particular, I'm using NYPD visuals here, but a lot of departments around the state are using similar things to this and around the country. This orange netting is a very popular tool for them for a technique that they call kettling. Kettling is actually frowned upon by most like human rights organizations and First Amendment groups because it creates panic, because basically you think you're just in a crowd and then all of a sudden the whole crowd is wrapped in this big orange net. It's very alarming. The police use it to make mass arrests when they want to arrest everyone in the net. And it's a very alarming situation. So just so there's no real way to avoid it. You don't necessarily know where it's coming from when you're protesting. But if you did happen to see them carrying the net, you will know that's what they're doing. They're looking to then basically wrap this thing around a huge group of people and arrest everyone in the net. These barriers are static barriers, so they're not going to be showing up and just wrapping you in them like the net. But you will probably see these if you're demonstrating in New York City. The thing to keep in mind is that the NYPD is actually required to keep exits for these, so they can't use them to make a box. It can't be a closed rectangle or square. There need to be openings in the barricades. And if you notice that there aren't any, we would very much recommend that you take pictures, document that, put it on Twitter, send it to us, send it to the AG's office, because that's actually a violation. It's very important that these are not used to pin people in. So I want to say a couple things about chemical weapons, not to be alarmist or to be super scary, but because it's a reality. Anytime you turned on your TV this summer, you would have seen that these are real. And so I just want to talk a little bit about how to keep yourself safe. So pepper spray is an irritant. And by that, it irritates your skin, your eyes, your mouth. It's an irritant. It is not a poison. It is, the effects can be short lasting, or they can last for, several hours, depending on how sensitive you are and how much you were sprayed. But pepper spray is the thing where the cop has it in their hand and it's a close up, targeted weapon. So they're using that against one or two or a few people, and it has to be used very close by. And in most cases, pepper spray is not going to cause any kind of long-term damage. It hurts, but is not going to, it's not going to cause long-term damage in the same way that tear gas is. So tear gas is not an irritant. Tear gas is a poison. And if you want information about tear gas, I'm just going to say that actually the best place to learn everything there is to know about tear gas is the CDC website. The CDC website has a whole section on chemical weapons, and they talk about tear gas. But what you need to know about tear gas is that it's an aerosolized powder that sticks to moisture. So I'm going to talk about this later, like what to wear and how to prepare. But if you have lotion or SPF on your skin, that's like glue to tear gas. So it's really important that you know how these things work so you can maximize your safety in the situation. Tear gas also sinks. Like I said, it's a powder, it's not a gas. So it's gonna sink. So the best way to get away from tear gas is to get as high as you can, as quickly as you can. So get out of the area. If you need to climb up some stairs or something, you can get to fresh air. And tear gas is a long range weapon. It's not up close. They're shooting it out of a canister. You've probably seen this on TV. It's not an up close weapon, and the canisters themselves are very dangerous and can cause injury. So it's really important to know basically what that is and sort of know that that could happen, because it can be very hard to protect yourself in the moment from a tear gas canister, from knowing that's coming. Generally, police are going to give a warning before they fire, but not always. We know that they don't always. Okay, so this is just a list of what to wear to a protest. Most of this is going to be self-explanatory. I would say pockets instead of a backpack, for example. I would wear long pants. This time of year, this is a lot easier if you have jackets on, layers. Layers are good if you did encounter chemical weapons, because if there's tear gas on your clothes, you got to take those clothes off or you're just going to keep inhaling it. So if you have sweater, you can just take it off. That's much, much better. In fact, the CDC recommends like not even like using those clothes again, or at least until you can wash them thoroughly. So layers are really important. And then eye protection. This is kind of tricky because you don't necessarily want to be wearing glasses in case there is a problem. Glass can break. If there is a projectile or something, that can be scary. But at the same time, you want to be able to see, and glasses might actually protect you in some circumstances. So I think this is really like a dealer's choice. You need to think about what is the best for you, what's going to make you feel the safest. If you think that this demonstration might result in the use of chemical weapons, we would say no makeup and no sunscreen. Mascara, moisturizer, those kinds of things are magnets for tear gas. And then contact lenses. Contacts are really problematic in a chemical weapon situation. It's like the worst thing you can have. So actually glasses are probably better than contacts if you can. So this is just a little recap of kind of like what to do when you're on the scene. I said it before, head on a swivel, know what's happening, save your battery, you're gonna need it, and it's gonna drain quickly, particularly in a really big situation where the towers are overloaded. Your phone is gonna be searching for a signal a lot, and that will zap your battery. So I would make sure to put it on low battery mode. You can reduce the brightness of your screen to save battery. Memorize a phone number. If you did get arrested, you are not going to be able to consult your phone for your emergency phone number. So have one number memorized, make that your virtual partner. Make sure it's not someone who's also on the scene. That's not that helpful if they also got arrested. So someone who's not there, memorize that number. And then capture officer names and badge numbers. These are supposed to be on display. They are not always. There's very well documented that the police often cover them up, but to the extent that you can tell their name or their badge number, get a picture of it, write it down, that can be really helpful if you do need to file a complaint. So this is this is the quickest possible know your rights presentation, which is there's basically just 3 lines you need to know. If an officer stops you, am I free to go? If the officer is looking through your purse, your backpack, your pockets, you only have 1 line, which is, I do not consent to this search. And then if you are arrested, there is only 1 thing you ever need to say to a police officer, and that is, I want to speak to a lawyer. Don't answer any questions except for giving them your name. You're under no obligation to, and the truth is you do not know what a police officer knows when they start asking you questions. They have information that you don't know about, and they are legally allowed to lie to you, and they will lie to you if they think it will let them get more information. So they might tell you that someone else said something about you. It could be a complete lie. It doesn't matter. To the police is not the place to defend yourself and tell your side of the story. To your lawyer is that place. Definitely defend yourself and tell your story to your lawyer. After a protest, document any injuries and get treatment. Send any pictures and videos. I put the New York Attorney General here. You can always send them to the NYCLU. Obviously, if you have a lawyer, those are three places where if you see abuses, the AG and the NYCLU in particular are going to be looking to follow up. And you could also send to your ACLU affiliate in any state, whatever state you're in. And then I would consider deleting images and videos. And the reason is this is a callback to what I said before. You don't want to become a witness for the state. You're not trying to get subpoenaed for anything. And if you delete it, then when you get the subpoena, the answer is I don't have those videos anymore. And then file complaints. This is for the Civilian Complaint Review Board. In New York City and other places, they have also civilian review boards or police review boards. File complaints of abuses you saw or abuses you experienced. This is the email address to get involved with the NYCLU's protest monitoring program, protest@nyclu.org. We are actually doing a training tonight. If you want to be a protest monitor with us, Ría in her presentation actually spoke about legal monitors and protest monitors. That is our version of that program. There are a lot of other ones, but if you want to get involved, feel free to send an email to protest@nyclu.org, and we'd love to have you. And with that, I will stop.
Thank you so much, Johanna. We have still a little bit of time left, and we have some questions about links to various volunteer opportunities. We'll be posting some of those in the chat. And before we go to the rest of the Q&A, I just wanted to give Abe Nelson, if he's here, an opportunity to get on and talk about some specific ways that you can connect. And so he'll talk about that, and then we'll pose some of the questions to the panelists. Abe.
Hey, everybody. Thanks for having me here, and thanks for coming, everyone, on your Friday afternoon. So just really quick, because I know we're running short on time, I'm working with Vote 2020 to get people engaged beyond the vote. And so part of that is we're asking people to take a pledge to take an active role in the election, which means voting if you're a citizen and are able, but also volunteering for a cause that matches your values. So that pledge takes about 30 seconds to fill out. All it is saying is that you will take an active role, and if you need help identifying something, then we're actually setting up one-on-one calls where we can help you find something that matches your values. But we also have, so I'll put that in the chat, the pledge, and you can take it if you are staff or faculty. So if there's any staff or faculty on here that hasn't taken it yet, we encourage you to take the pledge. Thank you, Susan. I appreciate that. We also do have some events coming up as well. And I'll drop the link for the Vote 2020 website, which has all of them, but there's one in particular that we're excited about that I want to really highlight. And that's an event that we're doing with Columbia Social Work Votes, which is a really cool group out of the social work school at Columbia. And that's a Get Out the Vote nonpartisan phone bank this Sunday from 2 to 4 in Pennsylvania. So I'm going to put that link in as well. And that's pretty much it. We would really appreciate it if you took the pledge. I know everyone's busy. I'm supposed to be doing my other job right now. But if I know that I woke up the day after the election in 2016 and felt like I hadn't done enough. And I've lived with that feeling for 3 years and 50 months, or 3 years, 50 weeks rather. So I don't want to feel that way again this year, and I know no one else does either. So any amount of time that you have over the next 11 days that you can put toward this, I think is a really good way to use some of your time. So I'll turn it over to whoever goes next.
Great. Thanks so much, Abe. So one of the questions that we had here, and I think this might be for Ría, but Johanna, you should feel free to chime in, is how can I help if I'm located in a more rural area where there may not be major mobilizations or protests going on?
Yeah, so right now we are looking for folks to support in a number of ways. Leading up to the election, we're doing a lot of phone banking for to get folks to get out the vote, to make sure they know about the dates, make sure that they're prepared. And so like text banking and phone banking is something that anyone can do remotely. There's little to no training involved. Also sending resources. If you are able to share what you have in the way of money and like even masks and water, send those to your local organizations, because that's what we need right now to be able to do these ground game work, to do this work on the ground.
Great, thanks. And Johanna, did you have anything to throw in?
I don't know if you were in an area of New York that's not New York City, but I'll just mention that the NYCLU has, we have 8 offices around the state. So anywhere you are, you probably have a local Untitled chapter. I'm happy to put you in touch.
Great. And Ría, if folks are interested in particularly the CPD related work, can they find out more information about, there it goes.
Yep, I just dropped in the chat. So we have we have 2 trainings coming up next week that are being run by CPD, and they are, one is for legal professionals, and that's on Wednesday, because I don't know if you guys know about lawyers, but they like to ask questions in a different way than normal people. And yeah, it gets real exciting. So we're doing one just for the legal folks, and talking to them about transferring their skill as legal observers and legal monitors and protest monitors, to use that. And then we're having one that's open to the general public. The last few trainings have had about 200 people each in them. So people are really excited to find ways that they can plug in. And again, you can do a myriad of things to support, but mainly, even if it's just on social media, sharing some of the like true, not misinformation, but sharing some of the true things that you see, that's also helpful too.
Great. I think one of the other questions that we have here is kind of maybe specifically addressing concerns that folks who have various kinds of immigration statuses that are not citizenship, what kind of restrictions might there be on their involvement in participating in protests or involvement in kind of election protection activities?
So I just did a panel yesterday for a group of non-citizens who wanted to participate in the election process. And I advised the same thing to them, like you can still do poll monitoring if you're able to go out in public. You can still do like making sure that folks turn out. Like right now in Georgia, for example, we're doing making sure that folks have rides to the polls. So we have 15 passenger vans in each, 5 of the metropolitan areas in Georgia, and driving folks. There's, again, water. There's making sure that folks, the lines are warmed. Anyone can do that, and so it's just like plugging in with your local civic organization group. And if you need help finding it, feel free to reach out to me. I'm happy to connect you, and making sure that we can do that. Yeah, you don't have to be a citizen to plug in.
Great.
From the protest and demonstration perspective, this is a great question. I'm so glad you asked it. So one way that this can be different, if you have documentation like a green card or a visa, there actually may be, there's certain laws that require you to carry that documentation with you at all times. So to keep that in mind in a protest situation, because like I said, there's not a 0% chance of you encountering a police officer. If you're required to carry that paperwork and you don't have it with you, that could be a problem. If you are a US citizen or you are undocumented, obviously there's no requirement to carry any ID. And the other thing to keep in mind, in New York City and a lot of other big cities, there are policies of not sharing information with ICE, but that's not true everywhere. In a lot of places, they are not only wanting to share, but like actively sharing information with ICE. So if you think that that could be a danger for you or your family, it's something to consider before you go into a high risk situation like a big demonstration.
Great. Well, thank you so much. We want to be respectful of people's time and want to give a big thanks to both Ría and Johanna and Melissa for sharing their expertise today. A great shout out to Michael and Susan, the Wagner team that keeps us all kind of together. Thanks for Abe, and be sure, for those of you connected to NYU, the link that Abe had there you can get one-on-one consulting with folks on how you can kind of connect, and please check the other links in the chat. We'll be sending out all of this information to folks who registered for the webinar also, so you'll have a record. So it's 10 days and counting, folks. Make your plan, vote if you haven't already, make your plan for how to defend the vote, and we'll see you as we try to defend democracy. Have a great weekend, everyone.